Once the police have cleared off from his living room in Chapter 11, Aiden, unnerved, is again alone in his old house. He decides to embark on a diverting project, which is to research his house as architect, so ventures onto campus for a visit to its library. It's just as haunted as his old house. The story he uncovers there mirrors recent life events. And what is more, someone seems to be following him through the vast, empty corridors. The persistence of memory. Chapter 12. The opportunity to visit the library in Peabody Hall provided an excuse to explore the connecting student union, Nader Hall. This great building was built after trustees purchased an old train station abutting school property. The large clock of some legend, entombed in a glass case at the main entrance, was the sole artifact to survive from this 19th century structure. The timepiece reportedly stopped one high noon when a train car carrying the remains of a famous racehorse passed through town on its way to Chicago. Eerily, the mayor's name was Eternal Noon. A yellowed copy of the Stone Store Register was framed beside the clock for any doubter to check. Beyond this curiosity at the door, Nader Hall was a sprawling affair and boasted a restaurant, bookstore, and bowling alley. The exterior was Gothic revival, while the interior, with many interlocking stairwells and passageways, seemed inspired by the Winchester Mystery House. The resident of that abode, the gunmaker's widow, constantly added to its architecture in hopes of confounding avenging ghost. In making his survey of the strange premises, Aiden was struck by discoloration on the walls where a number of plaques had presumably hung. A collection of paintings and watercolors now hung in their stead. These did not match up with or cover over the intrusive outlines. The visitor followed these vestigial echoes until he happened on artwork by Seth Bowles. The fellow painter paused to study the Kandinsky-inspired watercolor, as well as an accompanying photograph showing his apparent rival receiving an award of recognition. The philandering professor, Aiden reasoned, was typical of the ivied institutional experience. With institutions, Omar once wrote his friend, self-congratulation is the sincerest form of obsolescence. The more irrelevant you become, the more accolades they heap upon you. From the outsider's perspective, ivory towers tended to be oxygen-poor work environments, and those lured into them as young men with youthful vision invariably become pickled in all the naivete and vice of that age. Truthfully, Aiden's lack of art current cachet was a symptom and not the underlying cause of his contrary nature. He had no great love for the fin de siècle art world, to which he grudgingly tied his fortunes. The painter had cultivated no useful allies in his profession, and saw most artists, rightly or wrongly, as being either chattel or posers, artisans of proficient but mediocre gifts who, in the main, pandered to the vanity of collectors by replicating styles that had outlived their vital moment. Omar, in occasional rhetorical letters, never tired of bolstering his friend in these opinions. He was forever pointing out how culture was myopic by association, not by design. It was the politics of familiarity, which is first rewarded with gold and later with contempt. Culture, to his turn of mind, primarily served a calcified bureaucracy of grant endowers and professional grant recipients, and few others. Wherever two or more people are gathered in the name of culture, he would say, there is already a conspiracy against it. The painter continued down the corridor, needing little encouragement in his calloused role as self-anointed pariah. He found himself alone in empty buildings more often than not, and whether he sought them out or was left them by default, they underlined his acute isolation. With delusions of grandeur at one extreme and irrational, low self-esteem at the other, little lay in between to serve as a practical goal. Perfectionism preyed especially on the second of these weaknesses, where prior undertakings were never officially abandoned but reprioritized. In short, his fecund imagination was as blinkered as it was boundless, and for all the joy it brought him, he feared it would never be more than opiate in his veins. His many talents were not simply an excuse to be fickle and changeable, not simply an embarrassment of riches. They were symptomatic of a disorder. Somewhere ahead, the painter heard the sounds of a vocalist and a band, and was thankful for the interruption. He followed a mellifluous rendition of But Beautiful to pass into the darker end of the cavernous building. Beyond a row of impervious busts of past college presidents, two towering oak doors marked the entrance to a banquet hall. A pretty little girl in a pink dress peeked out the gap between them, and with greater curiosity about the approaching stranger than the lively wedding reception behind her. An unseen hand materialized to pull her away. Sudden movement in his peripheral view diverted Aiden's attention to a vestibule. A chaffinch circled frantically between two sets of double glass doors. He wished to free the poor creature, but feared opening the door from the lobby side would create an opportunity for the bird to penetrate the building. With luck, someone coming into the hall from outside would shoo it out. Wanting to escape the bird's dilemma, the interloper stepped guardedly to the banquet hall's entrance and watched couples engage on the dance floor. He wondered about what path he might have taken in life to place him on the other side of these doors. Nothing of the newlyweds was seen. A 4-tier wedding cake sat uncut across from a table covered with gifts. Where one imposing box bore no tag, the sight of it reminded him of the point of his campus visit. Turning back through the corridor, nothing more was seen of the chaffinch. The veneration connected to Purcell College's repository library, Peabody Hall, was due to its collection of rare books, most of which were cloistered away in tenebrous recesses on the second floor of the rotunda. This level overlooked the ground floor with an encircling balcony. Aiden inquired about his mysterious professor at the reference desk, and a librarian put him onto the original copy of Daedalus Monet's unfinished autobiography. Records and newspaper articles connected to him had also been downloaded from microfiche, and these seemed pertinent to the investigation. The patron soon ran across his first significant entry, a story from the Stone's Throw Register, dated from spring of 1979. Home struck by meteorite, woman killed in blaze. The first paragraph laid out details. Spyglass Darkly House, home of Professor Daedalus Monet of Purcell College, was almost destroyed when a meteorite struck it early Saturday morning. A subsequent fire swept through the residence and killed a young, but as of yet unidentified, woman in an upstairs bedroom. The professor was hospitalized in fair condition with smoke inhalation. Firemen on the scene say toppled candles were the likely cause of the ensuing fire. 2 days later, more developments made the front page. The identity of the deceased woman is still unknown. Rumors suggest she may have been a student of the professor's, who secretly moved into his house. According to unnamed sources, Daedalus Monet has a history of questionable relationships with female students, although there are no current reports of students missing from campus. The professor, for his part, is reported to have called the deceased girl a celestial being, and owing to his sudden deteriorated state of mind, his release from the hospital is being held up pending psychological evaluation. A second story on page 2 went into background. The professor's eccentricity is well known. Colleagues are uniformly quiet on these latest developments. Neighbors, however, are not reticent. They describe taciturn Monet as an egregious property owner who brings mice into the neighborhood by keeping junk in his yard. When questioned whether the young woman was seen around the property, no one at Willis Quadrangle can testify to this fact. Given the young woman was allegedly living in the house for several months, police regard it as odd that otherwise attentive neighbors should not have noticed her comings and goings. A delay in issuing a death certificate has further compounded the mystery. No firm conclusion has been reached on the woman's cause of death. Only a day later. The abrupt disappearance of both Daedalus Monet and the remains of the unknown woman have left hospital staff in disarray. The mayor has called for an internal review of hospital security procedure, while police continue their statewide dragnet for the professor and the corpse presumed to be in his possession. These bizarre events were soon chased from the front page with no more developments to report. Nevertheless, leaked police notes led to a follow-up article a year later. The professor told the police he designed a special room in his house, one where a rogue angel resided. He claimed this deity was given to him by his father, who inherited it from his father, who inherited it from Native Americans before statehood. Monet explained that tribal elders, being forced off their land, gave the spirit to Adrian Monet for safekeeping, claiming the form was so old it did not have a name and fell from the sky to create the mound. In exchange for sanctuary from his angelic league, this deity reportedly gave the professor's lineage special powers. Later in the saga, and initially unrelated to the angel, Monet told police he found the body parts of the woman in the meadow one day while plein air painting. He did not have the heart to turn her over to authorities, so carted the remains back to the house in a wheelbarrow, whereupon the services of his angel were employed to make the deceased whole. The angel was incapable of taking on spatial dimensions, but could assume the woman's form in the dimension of time as a memory. To effect this end, the bodily remains were returned to the mound in the dead of night and consumed in a pyre. Her ashes were then placed in a special urn and, when stirred, the angel was made flesh as a recollection. This recollection slept in a guest room, and when the professor painted her as a nude model, the angel purportedly fell in love with him with a woman's heart. On the night their love was consummated, avenging angels, sensing inattentiveness in their defector, stormed the house in a fiery invasion. The professor insisted the renegade escape to its secret place, yet left the young woman behind in the dimension of time as an inert memory, one waiting to be re-inhabited. When asked how an inert memory could take up space in the present tense on a mortician's table, Monet replied she was a memory for all who came across her. Regardless of her perceived state, she had no spatial body. The only ashes authorities said they found on the professor's premises, beyond those necessarily connected to the house fire, were burnt remnants of paintings in a suitcase. Police stated these set-aside ashes were demonstratively not human, and it was more likely that the professor, seeing the writing on the wall, rushed into his studio to facilitate the destruction of evidence that connected him intimately to a student, and perhaps aggravating the blaze in the process. By the time firemen arrived, he had heaped cinders into a ready suitcase and concocted a story. Police, it is worth noting, have been unable to locate the suitcase since Monet's disappearance. And as of the writing of the story 11 months later, it is ironic to add that the meteorite, which started these events, has itself gone missing in a theft over homecoming weekend. After this account, no further mention of the professor or the mysterious dead girl appeared in the paper. Ownership of Spyglass Darkly House transferred to the college in an intestate state, seeing Monet had no living relatives. Aiden was perplexed by what he read. He had, he believed, found fragments of Monet's paintings in the battered suitcase. It seemed improbable that police, or even those charged with the rebuilding of the house, would not have found the suitcase in the readily discoverable crawl space between the two upstairs bedrooms. The library patron moved to a large wooden table to peruse the professor's autobiography under a reading lamp. Before settling into its pages, an empty display case was noticed. A dusty plaque mounted on its base declared, "Nader Meadow Meteorite, crashed May 1979, stolen the following year." This element of the queer story was a little too conveniently placed in Aiden's path, leading him to regard his surroundings with a warier eye. He was soon engrossed in his reading material, and it was as strange a book as he expected to find. There were notes in the margins and crossed-out passages, which made deciphering the text difficult. After a half-hour of research, a wearing day began to catch up with the researcher. The pages grew increasingly heavier in his hands until, lost in an absent thought, the book dropped to his feet. When he reached down to retrieve it, he blearily spied an elderly woman dusting bookshelves with a feather duster. She appeared to be neither a student nor a library employee. A tote bag, half her size, was slung over one shoulder. A small asthmatic dog, resenting the debris settling on his head, was tucked inside. The recess where this impromptu housekeeping took place was ill-lit, though the housekeeper clearly engaged Aiden in eye contact. She continued to poke her duster into cubbyholes with a sense of purpose, so the patron's attention drifted back into his book. There it remained until the woman, abruptly in front of him, tapped his glass-covered tabletop with the duster's handle. "She followed you in here," came her warning. Aiden met her frighteningly huge eyes. "Excuse me?" The housekeeper rapped the table again. "The naked lady. She followed you in through the door." The rest of the library was uninhabited, except for the librarian at the front desk, who nonchalantly flipped through crisp pages of a magazine. The old woman jabbed at his book. "She put a note in there while you were napping. Just thought you should know." Matron and dog wandered off to resume their self-appointed duties, leaving the cautioned patron bewildered. He opened the back of the book to see a note slip out. The acid from the yellowed paper left a ghost impression on the inside flap of the cover, indicating it had not been disturbed in years. The handwriting was feminine. Will we be discovered? The lady had disappeared into the murky bookshelves, and Aiden was not sure what to make of her remarks, or how they related to the dated correspondence. Closing his book, he took stock of the darker stacks circling the balcony rail, unable to say whether his feeling of being watched was a legitimate one or simply owed to the power of the old woman to spook him. The tabletop's reflection lastly drew his attention to the domed ceiling. Footlights traced the concave relief of a watery nymph, whose unclothed body was directly over his head. A swirl of stars spewed from her womb in a winding vortex towards the apex. Aiden returned the book to the reference desk and crossed back through the connecting mezzanine passageway to Nader Hall. He was rapidly turned around, and given he did not have a watch and the only clock in the huge building was stopped, it was surely later than he realized. He dashed past a student lounge where a roaring fire was peculiarly quiet. A squeak interrupted the cavernous silence. It resembled wheels of a shelver's cart, such as was heard in Peabody Hall. It was comical to suppose one had followed him. The jittery fleer anticipated the dark figure darting around a corner ahead. The late hour did not recommend the presence of unsupervised minors. Reaching this corner did not produce a corporeal body, only another underlit passageway. Movement next emerged from one of its doorways, but this shape was pared down to a signaling hand. Or so it was reasonable to suppose. Aiden was becoming increasingly hesitant pursuing this course of inquiry. He came on a model replica of Nader Hall underage plexiglass. In pausing over the disintegrating structure, the flea circus encountered at the golf course bore comparison to it, even down to domiciling, crawling past. These specimens were not fleas, and only two were on exhibit. Both were thought dead until one, near the entrance of the model building, wriggled. It did not move again. The searchers stepped away from the display and sensed the second bug lurch after him. It reversed its track until he again stood over its motionless body. This same sequence repeated no less than 3 times, until Aiden despaired of the scene. His indecisive action was being reenacted in this maze. He did not shrink from the information that the choreography seemingly communicated. The 2 bugs, like pins in a map, placed the atrium and an exit in his vicinity, and he was relieved to find them. His chaffinch was lastly spotted lying in the floor, along a plate glass window, where it evidently died in a collision. This explained not only the chirping sound, and perhaps what he glimpsed, urging him forward, but also the wriggling bug that wriggled no more. A hail of leaves pelted him on pressing through the pneumatic doors to a courtyard. But the visitor was of no mind to humor his overstimulated imagination, so cut the shortest path across campus towards home.